Namaskar to all who are watching and a very warm welcome to the Festival of Bharat. We are an online forum that seeks to create wide-reaching content on diverse topics pertaining to Bharat and in doing so, serving the cause of Sanatan Dharma. We're living in times that are unique, civilizationally speaking, not just in Bharat, but worldwide. We're facing challenges that haven't been witnessed hitherto, whether it is COVID or the looming presence of the Taliban or the expansionist acts of the Chinese. The fight for survival is being fought on different fronts, and the tools and weapons are different too. How does Bharat, with its feet firmly rooted in Dharma, fight back against what Rajiv Malhotra ji called way back the breaking forces of India or breaking India forces? This question set as the backdrop of our current reality. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk to a person who has, in his own capacity as a young lawyer, taken on the cudgels for some of the key areas of contention in this civilizational battle. An engineer turned lawyer, he's an arguing counsel before the High Court and Supreme Court of India, and if I may say so, a sort of poster boy for Indic causes in the legal world. Please join me in welcoming Sri J. Sai Deepak ji. Namaste Deepak ji, and thank you so much for being here in spite of your very hectic schedule.
Namaste Mudita ji, it's a pleasure to share space with you on Festival of Bharat.
Thank you. So I just wanted to know, you're on a book tour even as we speak, right? You've covered
Yes.
a couple of cities, and how has that been? And how are things at home, considering the COVID situation? And I hope everyone's vaccinated and everything's fine there. And I hope you're able to handle the COVID protocols while you're traveling.
So fortunately, since I've gone through the dual vaccination process and I'm putting faith in the process, I have had the benefit of taking the risk. But the publisher as well as the local organizers in the 5 cities that have been so far in, so starting with Chennai, Bangalore, Pondicherry, Coimbatore and Hyderabad, they've been extremely careful about following the COVID protocols. And one of the reasons that I decided to undertake this tour, notwithstanding the fact that I didn't need this tour to promote the book, it had already achieved the status I hoped it would, is because I wanted to get a first-hand feel of the demographic that this book is reaching out to. What is it that people are making of this book? 3, is it reinforcing certain stereotypes, or is it forcing them to ask certain questions that they've never been exposed to? So these are certain things that I certainly wanted to undertake. And apart from that, of course, prior to the lockdown, I had the habit of at least delivering 2 letters a month. So this book tour gave me the opportunity to kickstart that process again. And I'm very happy to actually report that the demographic has been extremely heartwarming, because it tells me that the sense of pessimism that sometimes we operate from, staying in our own cocoon chambers, may be misplaced, and that there is more to, let's say, more to the reality that meets the eye when you actually see the action on the ground. Especially the age bracket of 15 to 25 is actively invested in the idea of Bharat. And that gives me a huge sense of confidence that the efforts of so many people, least of all mine, are not exactly being disseminated into ether, and that there is a very willing audience which is willing to consume it. Because I don't think any of our activities or pursuits are meant to be mere academic pursuits. None of us has the luxury of treating this as a mere academic pursuit or a scholarly pursuit. It's a civilizational imperative. Therefore, every step and every inch and every brick that is contributed to this particular edifice must result in creating a tangible impact. So I'm very, very happy at the reception that the book has received. So much so that the key constituents, namely from the legal audience, from the media section and the history departments, they're coming back with fantastic feedback to say that why is it that we haven't been taught this in schools so far, and why is it that we have looked at the entire colonization experience from a secular perspective as opposed to staring the reality and history for it truly was. So I'm happy that there is a willing audience, and I'm more than confident of the fact that this is not an audience that I have created. This audience has been created by a lot of people who have worked hard well before me and several of my contemporaries. So I'm more than happy to report that perhaps I'm riding the wave of the efforts of others as well. And hopefully I'm contributing a book which is worthy of their efforts as well. So let's see how it goes.
That's very true, Deepak ji, because I was there when you were in Hyderabad the day before, evening before, and I have to say, I mean, this was the sort of reception that you would have for, a person not from not from this kind of field. You would have that kind of a reception for, say, somebody from the media or a celebrity perhaps. So it is celebrityhood, although I would want to avoid that term. What do you think? You're being modest when you say that. People have laid the path before you. Yes, I agree, they have. But the kind of cult figure that you've become for the youth, what do you think? I mean, there must be something that you have identified, or you must have acknowledged, or that you will privately acknowledge about your fights or your, what is it that you think makes you so popular among the young?
I honestly don't know, but if I have to act as my own Sakshi or witness, and if I had to perform an out-of-body experience and get out of my body and look at how I behave, there are two things perhaps that have worked. Unfortunately, the fact that I'm able to communicate in English seems to resonate, which is an unfortunate reality.
It is.
So there is, let's say, the unintended benefit of coloniality, which I'm reaping. That's one. Second is, since I have been through the very same journey that the current generation is going through and is asking the very same questions that I asked of myself when I was in engineering, let's say 2002 to 2006, and the very same vitriol that I was subjected to, the very same criticisms that I had to encounter. The difference is that since I've been through this journey, I made certain conscious decisions to engage with this particular journey in a very systematic fashion, as opposed to letting emotion drive this entire journey. To use both jnana and karma as the guiding principles of making sense of this process, and not proceeding into a shell, but to actively engage with it. That therefore gives me the conviction to tell them that I know what you're going through, and I think it's possible to ride this dragon. So why don't you share with me your experience, and I'll tell you how to deal with it, at least at the best of my abilities. That's two. Three is the fact that maybe I bring to the table a certain sense of candor that they're not used to. Some sense of candor which is both restrained, contained, but at the same time, it doesn't fall shy of calling out the bluff of political correctness, the kind of filters that we are constantly subjected to. So maybe these are the three aspects. And four, dare I say this, even if I say so myself, I'm very clear about the fact that I will not speak on subjects that I'm not qualified to speak on. That I will specifically limit myself to areas where I think I have some kind of training, or at the very least where I think I'm a very keen student, even if not an expert. So the conscious decision to limit myself to those areas tells them that at the very least, I will not fib or faff when I speak on a certain subject. I'll be very clear. In fact, to the extent that in quite a few sessions, I have been fairly forthcoming about my ignorance on certain subjects.
You did mention the other day as well.
Right. So I've clearly told them who to direct a certain question to, that I shouldn't become the go-to expert on everything from ethnology to gynecology. So I told them that I'm not capable of doing that. There are about 3 or 4 subjects, and if I'm good at even 2 or 3 of them, I think my time is well spent. So that is exactly, I think, that is reached out. And I think more than anything else, for the efforts of any individual to reach a certain degree of fruition, the stars have to align in general, which means that the atmospherics of, let's say, the society is currently conducive for this kind of a thought. And while a lot of people may disagree, the fact that in 2014 May, there was a change in the political setup is significantly responsible for this, because it is that change in the political setup that gives most people the confidence and the vertebracy to start discussing these topics with the kind of candor and, let's say, outspokenness that we're doing today. So to take individual credit for something that someone else has actually done may not be right. We must give credit for the fact that the change in political wind has, if not, let's say, advertently, but inadvertently, it may have actually given us the freedom needed to discuss these topics. So a silent majority coupled with favorable political conditions is now willing to discuss these issues with greater openness and is willing to subject itself to a lot more scrutiny. That perhaps explains why I wouldn't call it celebrityhood or cult status. I would simply say that people have been warm enough to receive the points of view and give it the traction that I think it deserves, the point and not the messenger.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. So I was very curious, and I think a lot of people are. You do talk about how you, were brought up in a typical middle class setup, and then the usual aspirations were either being an engineer or a medical, doctor, and then of course all of that going abroad and then things changed for you and you became a lawyer. But I'm curious also to know about how your childhood. You grew up in Hyderabad and you went to a missionary school. So my curiosity is, or I speak for a lot of people, is what were the things, or was there anything usual, unusual in your childhood, things that you observed perhaps, maybe being in a missionary school, that maybe triggered or set in motion certain key philosophies, perhaps,
Right.
when you were young?
So, to be fair, I'm grateful to the teachers who were culturally rooted. But the teachers were perhaps slightly out of sync with the institution's own rootedness, because the school was a Christian school with a majority of Hindu teachers. So there was perhaps, let's say, a nascent friction, which has now become even more pronounced in several schools. Then I think the seeds of this friction were being sown, wherein the institution was forcing its teachers gradually to adopt a fairly modern anti-Hindu tone. Gradually that used to happen. And I remember a couple of teachers, Christian teachers in school, making fun of Ganesh Chaturthi processions in Hyderabad, the celebration of Holi, and a lot of things that may have, let's say, sown the seeds of certain questions and maybe a streak of rebellion. But I should also be grateful for the fact that there were quite a few teachers who, in that environment, were more than happy to speak for and stand up for Bharat's culture.
Wow, that's nice.
And invariably, these would be Hindi teachers or Telugu teachers, not the English ones, of course. Okay, so that made a huge, huge difference. Three, I think that in my generation, which may be slightly antithetical and maybe a lot of people who come from the current generation may be flummoxed about, is that people were aware of caste identities, but it did not make a difference to their friendships.
Yes.
The reason that you were aware of caste identities was to perhaps respect each other's dietary restrictions or maybe certain customs and conditions.
Correct.
But beyond that, it really did not make a difference to entry or access to anybody's homes, nor did it make any difference to the choices that you made in terms of friends. I can confidently say that all those people who are now basketed as Savarnas and Dalits and whatnot, that entire stream I have that's peppered across my friendships in school. Okay. Today it's difficult to even address that topic. Okay. So that is one thing that I think this generation must know, that you have demonized a certain social structure without really understanding what it stands for. It may or it may not be relevant, but the sense of, let's say, moral superiority or let's say sanctimony that you approach that particular structure with may be slightly misplaced. That's one. Two, perhaps this is common again to my generation, that families were fairly rooted in their culture, even if not heavily orthodox or highly religious. There was a certain normalized degree of religiosity which was observed, be it, let's say, celebration of festivals or community participation of certain festivals, or allocating or earmarking a certain day of the week for observance of certain festivities, or simply a spiritual practice. This was seen as normal. So that entire childhood, coupled with the fact that I'm the product of a joint family, okay, at least in the early formative years, must have put together a certain filter which has managed to survive the ravages of modernity, okay, and which has managed to survive all the ragging sessions for being a Brahmin or for whatever it is. So these are things that I managed to survive. So all of this, when it reached I think 2002 to 2006, when I was doing my engineering, is when I decided that if I do not stand up for the way of life that I have grown up with or I'm associated with, I will see it perish and die in my own lifetime. So contrary to popular perception and the hagiography that's typically built around, let's say, my movement or the causes that I choose, I'm not fighting for the society. I'm not fighting for dharma. I'm fighting for the way of life that I'm dearly attached to. And the hope is that I'm able to pass on at least whatever remains of it to the next generation. So it's an extremely selfish battle. It's an extremely personal battle. I do not suffer from savior complex. I'm saving myself, period.
Right, right. But I think that's true for any dharmic person who is trying to do that, is because it is deeply personal too, because it comes from a personal space,
Right.
in big ways or small. I think
Right.
I don't think dharmic people suffer from a mission civilizing kind of
Right.
zeal. Okay, so my next question is, so let me just shift gears and talk about. You chose intellectual property rights as your area of focus in your law degree, right? And India has fought already a few fights in this area, such as fight over turmeric, basmati, etc. I don't know. I was curious. What do you think are the challenges that lie ahead for India in this area of protecting our traditional knowledge? And can we do something about preventing such things from happening instead of just fighting reactively?
Right. So one clarification is, in fact, I didn't choose intellectual property. It just happened to be one of the choices that that landed on my lap, because as an engineer, when you try to make the transition to law, you're the first official black sheep of the family who's trying to make the transition to a profession that literally requires you to wear the black coat. So that's when you look for politically correct options which are able to sell to the customer, which is your family, to say, let me pursue this. And the LLB with specialization in IPR from IIT was the possible program that I could have sold to a Southern Indian family, because the IIT tag is something that everybody is a huge fan of. So I said, it's law, but it's from IIT. I'm sure it's okay. So that was the reason that I was able to sell it. Now, coming to the question of traditional knowledge. Interestingly, one of the internships that I did in law school was an internship under Professor Anil Gupta of IIM Ahmedabad, who runs quite a few foundations, specifically with respect to innovation at the grassroots level, and was very, very serious about even traditional knowledge structures. So apart from the litigation internships that I was interested in, this is one thing that I certainly took up. And I even wrote a paper specifically addressing the question of traditional knowledge when I was in law school. In fact, if you search for JIPR, the Journal of Intellectual Property Rights, along with my name on Google, this is among the first papers that I wrote on the subject. The reason why this is extremely important is we labor under the impression that there is no international mechanism to address problems of misappropriation of our intellectual property rights or our cultural property. And because apart from the larger question of how to prevent conversion, there is also the very specific question of what do you do with those aspects of it's called TKE, traditional knowledge expressions. That's the word that is used for each of these things in the legal parlance. Okay. Traditional knowledge expressions.
TKE, okay.
TKE, okay. So whether it is basmati or whether it is anything that we associate with our way of life, every tangible and intangible expression of your way of life is treated as part of your cultural property.
Correct.
So there is a larger discourse or a legal framework that the world has been discussing for several years. Now, it so happens that India is perhaps uniquely placed to bring to this particular discussion the blunt perspective that while you wish to protect the products of this way of life, somehow you're running away from protecting the way of life itself. Okay. This is as good as saying that I will protect the medicine that comes out of a tree, but I will not protect the tree itself. Okay. So therefore, we are trying to say, recognize the fact that your civilizing, colonializing, evangelizing tendency and the ongoing efforts of missionary groups across the world, especially in Bharat, which has become a battleground for their harvests, their soul harvesting activity, is the single biggest reason of, let's say, forcing several groups to abandon their ways of life and, in fact, adopt a certain consciousness that not only alienates them, but puts them at a diametrically opposite position to their erstwhile identity. And to put it in the words of both Dr. Ambedkar as well as Swami Vivekananda, every Hindu less is one enemy more, is more or less how it has become.
Exactly.
Okay. So not that I agree with Dr. Ambedkar and everything else, but these are certain aspects that I think he was fairly clear about. Okay. So I'm more than happy to pick and choose the best aspects of everybody's contribution to build a consolidated case for Bharat, because I'm not infatuated with or associated with individuals. I'm not attached to individuals. I prefer to see what is the best possible argument that I can choose from each of these people to present a bigger narrative. So on that particular front is when, so here's how I think my entire journey has tied itself back. I wrote the paper in law school, had the opportunity to see how the judiciary deals with these issues in Sabarimala, Padmanabhaswamy, and temple freedom cases. And then when I was exposed to the literature of coloniality, it all fell in place. Okay. So what started off as a research interest in law school as a student, which resulted in a simple paper, I was able to flesh it out much better through this book using some of the very same legal instruments that I discussed in law school, by the way.
Correct.
Okay, because 2006 to 2009 is when I was in law school, and one of the international instruments that deals with the rights of indigenous peoples is the United Nations Declarations for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples of 2007, which came out when I was in law school. Okay.
Wow.
So that is one instrument that I've discussed as part of this book to specifically say that while you speak of protecting certain aspects of our way of life, you do not recognize that Western institutions fund missionary activity, which actively kills this way of life. And here's the hypocrisy in your approach to this entire debate. Okay, so I was able to, so somehow all the pieces fell in place of this jigsaw puzzle. They fell in place as far as this book is concerned. Therefore, I don't know what to make of it, but there's not a single experience that I've had so far which is dispensable. In fact, each of the experiences that have been put through have turned out to be indispensable for the book. Okay, it's almost as if everything that I've gone through was meant to coalesce and converge in the form of this book. Okay, so the timing of this book couldn't have been better. Apart from the fact that I needed this repository of experience to capture in the form of a book, here is a time when Bharat is suddenly asking questions of its identity, especially in the backdrop of what's happening in Afghanistan. Okay, so with all these international developments, there is, according to me, destiny has created an audience for this book on its own. Okay, and I shouldn't be taking too much credit for it, simply because these are matters of coincidence or providence or destiny, whatever you call it. Okay, so my personal journey, segueing with the civilizational journey and the questions that it has started asking of itself at the right moment, has significantly resulted in this book getting the traction that it does. If this book had released, let's say 3 or 4 years ago, I suspect it wouldn't have generated the same kind of traction that it has. Okay, so which is why I think the specific answer to your question is that there is a legal framework, but that legal framework also is rife with coloniality because it uses let's say colonial categorizations such as tribes. Okay, and how that impacts the treatment of tribal communities and non-tribal majority communities such as Indian communities. Okay, and how we are seen as the successors of the European colonizer insofar as our own tribal communities are concerned.
Exactly.
Where the relationship between the Hindus and the tribal communities are seen as Hindus and Adivasis as opposed to them being treated as part of the Hindu community.
As part of, yes, exactly.
Exactly. So that is something that I've had the opportunity to address. It's really surprising that if you look at the Indian position in some of these international fora, they are aware of this distinction. It's not as if we are unaware of this distinction, but we continue to perpetuate this distinction in our internal policies also. Okay. So there is only so much that you can do to blame the outsider. When you have become aware of the problem and you don't seem to be addressing it, then clearly either you believe that this is the right way to go about it, or there is an incentive that you've created for yourself to not change from that particular position, which is perhaps the more dangerous position, which means that there is some kind of an economic incentive or a political incentive to ride on the coattails of the motivated history that the colonizer has created for you. That's such a dangerous situation. Okay, so that is one of the things that I've tried to call out without boxing myself in the baskets of left, right, and center.
So obviously, talking to you, I have to talk about the book, which is the sum and substance of this conversation. India, that is Bharat, and it's a tremendous book. May I just say that because I've read it, and There's so much information packed in there. It is definitely not an easy read. It will take time. But you do say that it's a bridge to bring to light certain existing scholarship on colonialism, post-colonialism, coloniality, and decoloniality.
Right.
So without giving too much away, because I would want people to read the book, could you just unpack these terms for the viewers and also tell us why you felt that some of these views needed a new thrust or a wider reach, especially decoloniality?
So I'll try to keep this simple with a conversational anecdote that I had maybe just 3 days ago, or maybe immediately after the session on the 19th. Okay. So it so happened that a very dear friend of mine, who's also a lawyer, was playing the devil's advocate. And he was asking me, isn't this book an exercise in intellectual edification? Okay. Does this have any practical value? Was the question that he specifically put. And it was a well-intentioned question. Okay. To basically ask, what is the practical value of this book to someone who's a practicing lawyer and who is asking himself, okay, fine, we've gone through this experience. So what? What does this mean? Okay. And all of these discussions which happen in the academic department, what is the bearing it has on our lives is what he specifically asked. I said, then that's precisely what this book is trying to address. That all the theories that are created in the ivory towers of academia ultimately translate to policy initiatives. And then it comes down to the level of politics. So the percolation of academia to politics is exactly what we are unable to understand, because we believe that these are people who are sitting away churning out theories after theories in some, let's say, in some random corner of a university, without understanding nobody is spending money on these people just for the sake of it. Every penny that is spent in these departments is meant to have a very specific outcome, is meant to create a very serious academic or historical justification for a future political initiative, whether it be reservations or immigration policies, or let's say displacement of tribal peoples, or let's say religious freedom with respect to conversion, development policies, language policies, everything comes from that. So if you believe that these academic institutions really have no bearing on your life today, that means they have succeeded in actually creating a shroud of invisibility where you don't know the invisible hand of these academic policies on your daily life. And I said, had you been in the government, you would have realized by now that the active resistance that you get from the student community to every Indic initiative or a civilization initiative is a direct product of the heavy investment in history departments and political science departments that the Nehruvian Marxist dispensation has done over the years. So I said, that question actually proves the need of my book, because I'm exactly trying to lift the veil and tell you this is exactly how this nexus works. And therefore, it's very important to ask, where does the money come from for this nexus? Is it from within or is it outside? Is somebody else funding all this initiative? So this tells me that the sheer material approach to some of these issues of culture is also a product of coloniality, where you're more than happy to cede space on cultural agency and civilizational agency, so long as you believe that your home and hearth are perfectly functioning well. Okay. So I said, even if that be the case, as a practicing lawyer, you must be spouting the values of constitutional morality on a regular basis. Do you know what is the origin of constitutional morality? Do you understand what is the origin of the very document that you celebrate and which is perhaps the source of your livelihood? That is when I think there was a certain reception. I said, this is precisely why at least 30% of the intended audience of this book are lawyers who constantly celebrate constitutional values at the expense of civilizational values and civilizational integrity. Okay. So I think the question more or less opened the floodgates for the relevance and the currency of this book. So that is where I see this book finding its own sweet spot, which is, it is Brit scholarship. At the same time, true to its role of a Brit scholarship, it tries to simplify existing concepts. But most importantly, after having simplified those concepts and making it more readable, because I don't think Brit scholarship should indulge in the art of unreadability. Okay, I don't want to do that. Instead, it should be even more lucid. Once I break it down, I then connect it to current issues. So, which is why I've said in several places that, of course, there's a mountain of literature and coloniality. There's a mountain of literature on civilization. There's equally a surfeit of literature on constitution. But there's not a single book that connects all three verticals and puts together a seamless narrative to say, this is how coloniality telescopes into civilization, which in turn telescopes into the constitution. And this is how it has a bearing on your daily discussions, whether as a lawyer or a non-lawyer, as let's say a student of political science or a non-student of political science, or a simple person who's asking himself, so what if we open the doors of this country to Ahmadiyas from Pakistan or Shias of Pakistan? What do we lose? After all, Atiti Devo Bhava, Bharat is a land of immigrants.
Yeah, we will think exactly.
Somehow, this mushy wallowing of humanist nonsense, and that kind of a sentiment I have never been able to relate to. Whenever somebody wallows in that kind of nonsense, I end up pitying that person for lack of intelligence and viveka. Okay, that you have not been able to separate emotion from reason, and for you both are the same. And these are the people who effectively whip out a candle at the drop of a hat and go out for the press march. Okay, my sympathies for their let's say psychological conditions, and I hope they seriously get professional help. But therefore, the entire idea was to say, wake up, you've wallowed in this nonsense enough. We, the rest of the society, and the ones for whom, let's say, whose hearts bleed for this particular land and the civilization, we are paying the price for your collective stupidity. So it's time that we start talking and we stand up and tell you enough is enough. So this book is a resistance in that particular sense.
Okay, so unpacking the term of at least decoloniality.
Decoloniality. I'll make it very simple.
Yeah.
So decoloniality is a response to coloniality. So it's important to understand what is coloniality. Coloniality simply is that particular phenomenon wherein after the colonizer has left, that is after the European white Christian colonizer has left, if a so-called free society and people continue to think on the same lines as the colonizer, not just about the rest of the world, but especially about themselves, and they believe that their societies must rise up to European standards in order for them to be seen as civilized, to the extent that they even refashion their own faith systems, their own knowledge systems, their own approach to science, their own approach to nature. That is proof of mental slavery. So mental slavery in academic language is coloniality. And decoloniality effectively says, let us completely remove this shroud which is preventing us from looking at our past in the manner it is supposed to be looked at. And I also make the point that the idea of looking at the past is not to recreate the past or to glorify the past, but to objectively understand where we stood as a society and what is it about our past which modernity prevents us from applying to the present. If I want certain principles of my past or my culture to be reinscribed in the policy initiatives of the present, why is it that modernity constantly comes in the way of it and tells me your past is outdated, your past has no relevance, your past is best studied in books and is relegated to the museum, and its extinction is its sole purpose, and it has achieved the zenith of its utility through extinction. In that position, I would want to basically say, I think this bluff needs to be called out. So coloniality is that, decoloniality is effectively cultural resistance to cultural colonization of the mind. That is what I would broadly call it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I hope it becomes a buzzword and people start,
Thank you.
Understanding it, and then also start. I mean, it exists, but it has to become a movement. People start, also.
The part is, when the subtitle of the book was being put together, the publisher had serious reservations about using the word coloniality on the title, saying, "It is so academic, who will buy it?" It is this word that has actually resulted in massive outreach because it has suddenly piqued the interest of people saying, you've heard of colonialism, you've heard of colonization. What is this coloniality?
Exactly.
So that's exactly why people are buying it.
Absolutely. And now, also in the book, this is you talk about you deal with it exhaustively, but you talk about the anti-clerical movement in the form of Reformation that happened in Europe, and that was used by our so-called colonial masters to initiate a kind of anti-Brahmin sentiment in Bharat as well.
Right.
So this notion that the Brahmin is a sort of Indian version of the white master, the white persecutor, is so strong that we see it not just here in India, but also in the West. For example, in the works of people like Isabel Wilkerson, who wrote a book called Caste, The Origin of Our Discontents,
Right.
where she actually clubs caste along with the horrors of the Holocaust and slavery in America.
Right.
So my question is, how do contemporary Bharatiyas, Indians, how can we counter this narrative? Because I actually engaged with somebody online who was promoting this book, and from the West. So it's difficult because they have such strong opinions about this bogeyman called the Brahmin.
Right. This Isabel Wilkerson's book on the caste, according to me, touches such a raw nerve, and it's important for us to discuss this threadbare because it's a hot potato, simply because she happens to be an African American.
Exactly.
Okay. So why is it that they did not use a white Christian to write this book? Okay. Why is it that an African American has been chosen as the author? Because I don't believe that this is an organic effort of an individual. I believe that it's been put together.
Oh, is it?
Okay. Why did you do that? Because you're using a former slave to talk about a future slave. Okay. So therefore, you are using someone whose religious identity you have robbed and who's not questioning the theft of her identity or religious identity, and who's now limited the entire scope of our discussions about her past to race. And that racial prism is the very same prism which she uses to look at other colonized societies, which have somehow managed to retain their religious identity, which is not Christian.
Very true. Very true.
Okay. So the point is, you have failed as a community to stand up and protect yourself. My sympathies are with you. I will not kick you for having gone through that, and I will not laugh at you for what you've been through. You have gone through perhaps the worst of genocides, but I do believe that today you have not only converted to the entire worldview of the colonizer, your former master, but you're asking the rest of us who've managed to successfully stave off that particular slavery to also convert to his worldview. And you have become a paid ambassador of that particular initiative by imposing the ethnocentrism of the white Christian European and the Westerner on our societies. That is the first response to that book. Okay. Now, I'm sure that there are better qualified people who have done extensive research on caste who are much better placed to respond to everything that that book contains. But the broadest possible response, which is most important, is the weaponization of race and its imposition on an artificial construct called caste to understand Varna and Jati. Okay, so that serious conflation is something that I try to address in certain parts of the book. Second is the reason why this is important is a lot of our, let's say, our family members fled India because they wanted to run away from the reservation system, and they wanted to find greener pastures and let's say greenbacks in the United States. And unfortunately for them, caste has come to haunt them even in America.
Right.
Okay, so they thought that running away would be a solution. Now history is telling them that escapism is never a solution. You have to turn around and face this creature. Okay. Now you have the Cisco case going on in certain courts in America. Then you have caste being used to whip up Hinduphobia as well as Hindumissia. All of these things are happening. Okay. Now I'll tell you why I'll connect this to my previous point on the African American identity of Isabel Wilkerson. Is because when the BLM movement was going on and the BLM riots were going on, quite a few well-meaning, let's say, educated Hindu Americans were saying Hindus should express solidarity with African Americans because they're exactly going through what we are going through, but it's even worse because it's institutionalized. All that is fine. But my only question then was, do you realize that some of the pastors and padris who are sent to India are actually African Americans? Is that a question that you're willing to address? That the black churches of America export a significant number of missionaries to Indians, to India. My school, St. Anthony's High School, which is based out of Himayat Nagar, used to see a regular stream of African American missionaries from America. Okay. So there is a center in Hyderabad called the Muttangi Center, and which is a Christian center. And that center, what they would do is that the African American missionaries would come. They would pass around gifts to students of the school, and they would try to look hip and cool and all that. And they would take these children to the Muttangi retreat for a week or so. These kids would go there for a week, come back abusing your own gods, come back abusing, let's say, especially the Sabarimala tradition, because that used to, so those days in schools, you were allowed to wear the black dress and observe the 41-day Vrata in school and all that, despite it being a Christian school. Those children would be the first targets of these children who would come back from the retreats. This used to happen to 6th graders, 7th graders, 5th graders. Okay. I said, this is exactly what your so-called BLM movement exports to this country. Okay. So merely because you want me to get into the good books of African Americans and express solidarity, please don't treat us as equal victims, because he has now become a part of the oppressing community. Okay. So much so that he's not fighting for the reclamation of his pre-Christian faith. He's fighting merely for equality as a black Christian American. Okay. That is what they've gone to. They want to see a black Jesus as opposed to asking why Jesus. Okay. So considering all of this, we don't need to necessarily express solidarity. We can only say perhaps the white Christian as well as the African American deserve each other at this point. Okay. And maybe let's see, hopefully something positive comes out of this, where the white Christian is forced to ask himself whether the civilizing project that he's undertaken all of the world is right. And the black Christian also asks himself whether by embracing the Christian identity, he's become part of a, let's say, an oppressive regime. Okay, let him start asking the question. Until then, I see no reason to simply jump on the bandwagon merely because I want to look politically cool, and on Instagram pages, I must basically say BLM matters, Black Lives Matter, those things. Okay. So on this, there was really no response when I asked these questions of certain bleeding hearts. So the response that we should effectively evolve is twofold. One is serious scholarship is missing, or at least its dissemination is missing. Okay. A lot of people have come out with fantastic work, but ultimately, as I said, some of these works must enter active public discourse seriously, as opposed to being relegated to certain corners of libraries. Okay. Therefore, we need bridge scholars or simplified abridged versions of existing scholarship. That's important. And two, the Indian state needs to abandon the legacy of caste history that it has inherited from the British man and ask very hard questions. Because you see, one of the things that they don't want to discuss is those communities which were previously into the leather industry, the tanneries, and so on and so forth. Now they have been pushed to the societal margins, and that entire industry or the community has lost out to industrialization or the takeover of their traditional professions by Muslim communities in this country. Okay. Now that makes them extremely vulnerable to conversion. Okay. And then their histories will be reinvented to say that they converted because of Hindu oppression, not because of industrialization coupled with the takeover of their professions by Muslim communities. Okay. So the convenient punching bag again becomes the so-called caste system, as well as the Hindu community and the Savarna community. And for some weird reason, even the current dispensation at the center in Bharat seems to be pushing that stereotype, okay, as opposed to challenging it. Which is why I keep saying that you can't hope to create a civilizational vision on the backs of colonialized versions of your history. Okay. If you too fall back on the very same demonization of the Brahmin, and you too fall back on the very same demonization of so-called Brahminical institutions, then how are you different from the previous dispensation on this front? And effectively, it means that the Brahmin is the common object of hatred, and you don't realize how you are spewing venom on your own knowledge traditions. And that's exactly what I did in the first section of the book, where I show how bearers of knowledge traditions of Africa were singled out and slowly wiped out using similar strategies of race and whatnot, or inventing tribal fights. And I said that's exactly what happened there. And here caste is the entire construct, or tribalism is the entire construct. And with such abundant scholarship from the West telling you the very same thing, how can you behave like an ostrich and proceed to formulate policies which pushes the notion of caste even further, which entrenches it even further. So the second book of this trilogy will unpack the discussions surrounding caste, scheduled tribe, and reservations, which happened as part of the framing of the Constitution, to ask one simple question. Before these policies were put together through the medium of the Constitution, did they actually consider the fact that the versions of history that they were falling back on were versions of received wisdom, of European or Western experience of Bharat societies, okay, and not indigenous points of view? Did they consider that or not? I will certainly touch upon this as part of the book, okay? Because the idea is to say, what is the point of thinking of a response to the West when the first people to be addressed are within this country? Okay, we can keep responding to the West provided we at least have some semblance of uniformity in our positions on this. Okay, again, the very important clarification that I've given in the book, and it needs explaining here. I am not denying discrimination.
Yes.
I'm not denying the lived experience of people who have been treated as untouchables.
Yes.
I'm not denying the fact that certain communities have been kept out of temples. I'm not denying the fact that somewhere the system, perhaps its rigidity, has come to its own detriment. I accept all of that. I'm merely going to ask myself this question: how much of that is a product of, let's say, external influence? How much of that is a direct product of what is purported to be the scriptural basis of it?
Yes.
Okay. How much of it can be directly attributed to the Purusha Suktam? How much of it can be directly attributed to the Manusmriti? These are questions that we must ask.
Yes.
In fact, to the extent I've also said this, I've had discussions on the Manusmriti with a lot of people who are traditionalists, who are, let's say, practitioners of Dharma in perhaps the most traditional form. And I don't use it in a negative way. I'm simply saying perhaps in the most pristine form. Even they say, one, Manusmriti is not law. Two, Manusmriti was not applicable to the entirety of this country because it's a diverse land. Three, it is not prescriptive, it is significantly descriptive, wherein it merely records the existing circumstances. And four, nobody says that all parts of Manusmriti is currently applicable, okay, or for that matter, Manusmriti has any contemporary relevance.
Yes.
To use one Smriti to bandy the entire civilization is so horrendous when you have so many Smritis.
And so much literature, so many texts, there is not one defining text or a text.
So somebody pointed this out to me, that the number of books that we have is much more than the table of contents of the one book that others have. Okay. So you can't use one Smriti to actually paint us all with the same brush. So I think there are multiple levels of responses, but the first institutional response that we must come out with is not negationism, but a decolonial objective approach to the system as it existed. Come out with that scholarship, accept its realities, and then think of a response to the West. Because an emotional response at this stage, because you believe that your civilization is under attack, is perhaps the worst possible response. Because it is an ill thought through response. There is no coherence, there is no articulation, there is no depth, there is no preparation. Okay. So when you're angry, especially on these aspects on a daily basis, take a deep breath and channel that anger to putting together something which is helpful in the longer battle or the longer war, as opposed to simply putting out 140 characters or 280 characters on Twitter.
True, I agree. All right. So I'm coming to something that, I think has captured everyone's imagination lately, is your recent viral tete-a-tete with Sri Shashi Tharoor ji, with him on certain core inaccuracies. So it is interesting that while the non-Indic camp, speaks of the idea of India as opposed to a reality, parts of which they brush under the carpet conveniently and parts of which they've constructed in their heads. But they bristle when the Indic side speaks of the dharmic principle.
Right.
So all of this is connected to this bogey of identity politics. So in the interview, you said that identity is not the same as consciousness.
Correct.
Could you speak a little bit more elaborately on that? Because I think it's very important for people to understand this.
So identity is a legal marker on paper. So you see, this distinction comes from the literature surrounding indigeneity or indigenous groups. Okay. So when you discuss the rights of indigenous groups or what we know as tribal groups crudely in this country, okay, the question is, do you look at it, let's say from an ethnocentric perspective and think of it as a separate race, or you ask yourself, what makes them indigenous? The state of being indigenous is indigeneity. And the state of being indigenous means you exist in a certain way or you think in a certain way because there is an entire way of life that supports that certain consciousness or that way of thinking. Okay. Now, if you were to simply say tribal identity, okay, fine. You come from a tribal community, then you are anglicized through your English education, and then you enter what you know as the mainstream society. Are you still tribal in consciousness or only in identity? That's the basic question. So it would mean that you come from the tribal community, but you no more share their way of thinking. Okay. So the distinction between identity and consciousness is one perhaps is traceable to lineage or birth or matters which are beyond your control because you simply land with those factors. If you're born in a certain community, there's nothing that you can do about it. Okay. Therefore, it becomes your identity simply because you're born. But if you do not believe in that community's way of life, then despite your identity, you don't share their consciousness. Okay. So the reason why I make this point very clearly is we are a Hindu majority country in identity, not in consciousness.
Very, very true. Yes.
Okay. So when every time we say we should still draw comfort from the fact that we are 80%, we are 79%, whatever it is, I say, Arey bhai, the other side is fully conscious of its identity.
Correct. Yes.
Whereas you are not. Therefore, you are HINO, Hindu in name
Hindu
only.
in name only.
So therefore, it is an identity. It's a marker. It's a legal marker. It is not a consciousness marker because you no more think like a Hindu. You're not conscious of your roots. You're no more interested in Hindu civilization interest. You no more subscribe to the Hindu way of life. So that is the distinction. Now, what is the cross-pollination effect of this? That someone could be of Christian identity but Hindu in consciousness.
But that's rare.
That's rare. So, for instance, Konrad Elst, for that matter, is not a Hindu in terms of the, let's say, the lineage. Okay. Konrad Elst, Dr. Konrad Elst.
Yes.
Right?
Or for that matter,
David Frolley, all of these people, or Michel Denino.
Yes.
That's why I say that just as it is possible for you to be European in mind and Hindu in name, it is possible for someone to be European in name and Hindu in mind. It works both ways. Okay. And perhaps that is the only way to protect this way of life, no? Because we have effectively given up.
We have given up. Yeah.
And therefore, Swami Vivekananda says it will come to a point where the West will start pursuing and protecting this particular knowledge structure, while you idiots will follow the Western structure. Okay.
It's happening even as
it's happening as we speak, right? So that prophetic vision, unfortunately, is coming to fruition. Okay. And therefore, this distinction is so important because unless until you do that, you are going to alienate those people who are interested in protecting our way of life. Okay? Because dharma is about bija raksha, and the bija raksha someone has to do. You have been given the opportunity to do so as descendants of the civilization, but if you're so ungrateful, then providence and dharma will find a way of protecting itself in the right hands. Okay. So it is for you to value the lineage that you have inherited. It is a sad reality that you spew venom on it and others are looking at it with a lot of value and respect. Okay. So that is the distinction. The second thing that I'm also trying to say is that when you look at indigeneity, the Western approach is to conflate identity with race, and therefore notions of tribe, caste, everything is about ethnocentrism. And that is precisely why they look at even Hindu nationalism through ethnocentric lens. Okay. And unfortunately for them, Savarkar's use of race in his work becomes the go-to reference to say, here is someone who propounded Hindutva and he spoke of race, and therefore Hindutva is all about race. Okay. Now, the one thing that I wanted to point out to Shashi Tharoor, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, and I just didn't want to embarrass him further, was that he said, Swami Vivekananda's Hindutva is different from Savarkar's Hindutva. Savarkar's Hindutva is ethnocentric. Swami Vivekananda never referred to race. Did you read the complete works of Swami Vivekananda? The word race and Hindu race is so constantly present in his works that I'll have to ask the simple question, have you even read one book of Swami Vivekananda to make this statement? Okay. Not to say that Swami Vivekananda also subscribed to ethnocentrism, but you have to realize that in the times that they lived in, race had become such a huge construct thanks to the colonizer. Everything is about race.
Right.
Martial race is doctrine, caste is race, tribe is race, everything is race, religion is also race. White means race, Christian means white, white is race. That's the straightforward equation. It's like associative property, white equal to Christian, Christian equal to race, and that's how the whole thing comes about.
Correct.
So therefore, some of their statements are obviously the product of the times that they lived in. So tomorrow science will prove, and archaeology will prove, linguistics will prove, and genetics will prove that there is no such thing as Aryan invasion theory.
Correct.
Then what will you do about those aspects of Swami Vivekananda's discourses where he speaks of the Aryan race?
Correct.
Okay. So then you have to say some portions history will negate, but the spirit of what he said continues to be valid.
Very true.
Okay. You don't need to junk him entirely. That's not going to happen. And you shouldn't be doing that. Because as much as these were evolved beings, or at least significantly evolved beings, they are products of their time.
And they're human.
So you need to take that with a huge pinch of salt. So therefore, the idea is to say, the ethnocentrism with which you look at Christianity is not the ethnocentrism with which you look at us, because our structures are based on knowledge-based structures. Okay. Assume for a moment that even there was a racial component at some point. The combination of the Guna Karma matrix was meant to effectively create a knowledge-based structure out of it, because you look at, let's say, Guna is seen as the product of the Kshetra Bija phenomenon, which is to say, what is the characteristic that someone gets as the product of the features of the mother and the father. The father is the provider of the seed, who is the Bija, and the mother is the womb, therefore she is the Kshetra. Okay, so the Kshetra Bija results in a certain Guna, but then the larger karma that you subscribe to, either as part of your collective community, or you believe that I wish to do something which the rest of the community does not do, okay, and therefore it becomes a new jati in itself, a new interpolation in itself, then that vocation slowly starts changing the feature of whatever you have inherited. Okay, so the choice that you make as an individual could be at variance with the gunas that you may have inherited or you are expected to have inherited from your parents. So what is the argument? The argument is this, to put it in legal parlance. If you come from a generation of teachers or lawyers or doctors, if you happen to be another teacher or doctor or lawyer, okay, then there is not too much to be surprised about. Okay, the presumption is that you could be another carrier of the very same knowledge tradition or vocational tradition. But it is not an irrebuttable presumption, it is a rebuttable presumption. That means you could make the departure as well. Okay, so 3 lawyers and 1 doctor, that is a possibility. Okay, so therefore, there your individual karma will choose a departure which is different from the gunas that you may have inherited in 3 generations. Okay, then you become a new jati on your own. Okay, so therefore, this complex structure where there's a constant movement, mingling, so on and so forth, across such a huge geography, as an idiot, you want to apply the simple racial filter to understand such a complex structure. The bacha is trying to effectively measure the father. You have come much after us. You are experiencing so little.
Yes.
You really want to talk about us? We are much older. You have no idea how our structures have flourished. How multiple races have come here and have become part of us because of a knowledge-based approach is something that you have not understood. So I address the question of indigeneity both from a Hindu perspective as well as to repel the ethnocentric accusations that we are constantly foisted with. Okay, and that's precisely why I don't think Dr. Tharoor understood when I said that anthropology is the obsession of the European. Whereas ontology, epistemology is our obsession, which is to say metaphysics and knowledge is our obsession. Race is his obsession. I wish he had been educated on, let's say, decolonial literature. He would have understood the point.
He should have read your book before he got there.
he actually made the point before getting on the podium. Oh, you have the advantage of having a copy of my book to read it, but I don't think I've read your book. I wanted to respond that as such a huge politician, you would have had a research team which should have done its background.
Exactly.
on this book and who this guy is and all that. You should have come prepared. So blame your underestimation of the entire situation. I can't do anything about it.
I think you took him completely by surprise, Deepak ji, over there. He was out of his depth, clearly. Now my question is completely shifting gears to something else altogether, but you did mention it in a couple of your talks, I think, the education policy. So because all of this has to, like you rightly said, percolate to the lowest common denominator, and that is the average student. I mean, what kind of education are we? This is all the decolonization must happen there.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on the national education policy, the NEP, especially in the light of the RTE Act, which was instituted during the Congress period? Do you think it's a step in the right direction, or have we missed the bus again?
So the lack of any kind of serious discussion on the part of the government with respect to dismantling the RTE structure and the continuing devastation of, let's say, the Hindu school ecosystem is a serious disappointment. Okay. NEP cannot address issues that arise from RTE.
Okay.
NEP can address content-related issues, not issues of control of institutions. Okay, these are two different aspects.
Two different things.
Okay, and therefore, let's take this argument a step further. What do they say? That the economically poor sections of the society need not be accommodated by minority educational institutions because they are an exception to the RTE principle.
Right.
Okay. In a way, I'm happy because if they go there, they'll get converted.
Oh, yeah, true.
Think about it.
True. I didn't think about that.
Think about it. That you send people who are financially weak and you mandatorily include them as part of Muslim and Christian institutions.
Done for.
You are sending, I'd say, souls in their hand.
Yes.
Okay, you're actually, you're giving a laddu or a thali. I wouldn't do that. Okay, so that is an aspect that people don't want to look at. Okay, because initially I too was saying the same thing. Arey, why are minorities exceptions? Why are minorities?
Exactly.
I said, it's a good thing that you're basically saying that our poor will study in our own institutions, not somebody else's institutions.
Correct.
The only problem then would be that the state must make good the promise of its subsidy, which it is not doing, which is the money that you incur as a consequence of subsidizing this education, which the state must compensate for. That payment is not coming through and it is not sufficient, which is what is destroying the school system itself. Now, then what happens is, as opposed to the poor being accommodated in our schools, the existing children will go to other schools.
Correct.
Okay, because our schools will die. Okay. So
it's happening. I see that in schools. Yes.
Correct. So NEP addresses only certain aspects, but even there were three criticisms. One is the tentative, circumspect, diffident approach to revamping history. Okay, it's almost as if they're saying, we are going to do this, we hope there won't be a backlash, and we hope nobody will object to it. But whatever you do, people are going to object to it. Okay. Why are you being so guarded? It makes no difference. You are a saffron fascist according to them, and you'll remain for eternity.
No matter what you do.
No matter what you do. So who are you trying to placate? What use is this entire appeasement agenda? It doesn't make sense at all. This won't translate to votes. This will translate to nothing. It will only translate to better positioned economic communities who will have the reach to spew venom in multiple places. That's exactly what's going to happen. Okay. So you focus on, fine, as a government, you have to, sabka saath, sabka vishwas, you keep doing that. That's a different issue. But focus on your core constituency. That is your core agenda. You've been voted to do something. So notwithstanding 370, notwithstanding CA, notwithstanding, I don't know if the government can take credit for the verdict of the Supreme Court. I hope they don't, because that would be seriously problematic, because then they'll be sending multiple mixed signals. So as opposed to doing that, so having given credit for at least two of your initiatives, I'd say go beyond that. Because you see, you're trying to address certain legacy issues inherited for the last 70 years, but there are continuing issues as well. Okay, that is what the NEP and the RT should be the focus of. So there, I don't think they've done a great job of it. But to give them some credit, at least they're talking of a new curriculum. Okay, that is the tragedy or tyranny of minimum expectations that we have come down to. Kuch to ho raha hai.
Okay. We really lowered our bars so much that
so much.
Very true. As both a lawyer and a purveyor of the Bharatiya Renaissance, how do you think we can both indigenize and reform the Indian judiciary? I know I'm jumping guns, but that's also very pertinent. I mean, I know you come from the ecosystem. Do you have anything to say about that?
Uh, Assuming that there is this chimerical creature called an ecosystem, which I'm supposed to be a part of, all I can say is just before your session, I had a discussion on CNN News 18 in the backdrop of Chief Justice of India Ramanaji's this statement on the need to indigenize Indian legal systems. Okay, that statement he has given.
Okay.
So I'm assuming that when the Chief Justice of India makes such a statement, obviously it is perhaps a sign of things to come.
Things to come.
Otherwise, such a sensitive statement wouldn't have been made. Okay, so because it is rife with it can lead to controversy also. Okay, so someone wearing a crown of thorns wouldn't make a statement that will lead to controversy unless it is meant to have an intended effect. Okay, so I'm hoping that it translates to something. I'd like to see what it translates to. In terms of very specific policy prescriptions, there are about 7 prescriptions that I've given in the second section of the book under the civilization section, based on R.K. Mukherjee's prescription of how a civilization state must function. Now, what does this translate to in the form of a constitutional framework? I will be in a much better position to give these prescriptions, if at all I have any, after I'm done with the second book. Okay. Because the second book is where I undertake an analysis of the problem, if it exists, and then certain prescriptions. So that will take some time.
Right, right.
And to be fair, since this is not a propagandist literature, there is no predetermined outcome towards which this is moving. I've still kept a very open mind to the fact that the Constitution is perhaps not as terrible a document that, as people make it out to be. And the kind of perversions and distortions that we associate the Constitution with is perhaps the judicial interpretation that is being foisted on the Constitution, which may be at variance with the original intent of the framers of the Constitution. And there's a good reason for this. Of course, it's anecdotal, it's not scholarly, which is, so look at the people who populated the assembly. Madan Mohan Malviya, the founder of Banaras Hindu University, Sri Rajagopalachari. None of these people can be simply accused of being mental slaves.
Exactly, yes.
Okay. Then you have Kulapati K.M. Munshi, the founder of the Bharati Vidya Bhavan, a lawyer, a constitutional expert, coupled with a great historian. Okay. So these people had a sense of history as well as a sense of, let's say, constitution. All of this is there. Okay. H.V. Kamath, these are all people. Then Lokanath Mishra, the one who actively pushed for adoption of Sanskrit as the primary lingua franca of this country. With all these people being present there, we have painted the entire Constituent Assembly with Nehru's brush. Okay.
Ambedkar.
Nehru, Ambedkar. So many people were there in the Constituent Assembly. It's not as if it was a dialogue between two people. They decided.
They just sat and wrote it down and like, okay.
So therefore, I want to do justice to these people because I'm sure they would have defended the civilizational interest during the course of the debates. Okay. And when we keep saying this, that it was not elected, it was not elected. No, there was a certain proportional representation. It may not have been ideal because you're basically looking at the current democratic structure to look at how the Constituent Assembly was elected without realizing that no country has given complete adult franchise upon independence to all its population except Bharat.
Except Bharat. True, true.
So considering that, you're foisting current day expectations of complete adult franchise to 1946, on to 1946. Okay. So therefore, you're saying all of us were not consulted. How many people do you want to be consulted by when out of 36 crores, a significant proportion of the population was living under below poverty line? They had no access to food. They were, dying under poverty. You expected them to contribute to the constitution.
And how? What would be the means?
What would be the means? And what is worse is that when people make these statements, they don't realize. So here's the stage that happened. And this is what I'll be busting as part of the book, the second book, that Dr. Ambedkar did not draft the constitution, point one. It was drafted by Benegal Narsingh Rao, the constitutional advisor to the Constituent Assembly. Okay. He prepared the draft constitution, shared it with the drafting committee. The drafting committee was put together by the Constituent Assembly, which had about 7 to 8 members. They elected Dr. Ambedkar as the chairman of the drafting committee to fine-tune the draft presented by Benegal Narsingh Rao. Okay. So who you call as the architect of the constitution is the fine tuner of the draft. Okay, that's one. Second, what they do is that after they fine tune the draft, they send it out to multiple places and constituencies and multiple public leaders for their inputs. Then that particular constitution, which is, so first draft is revised by the drafting committee. Then based on inputs, it is further revised. And it is that draft that is presented to the Constituent Assembly on 15th of November, 1948. Wow. Okay. Now this entire process happens where you have held multiple consultations and still people keep saying, "Humse nahi pucha, hamare pardada se nahi pucha, hamare tata se nahi pucha, inse nahi pucha." Arey, what are you saying? Did you know all of this happened? Okay. So imagine how much of WhatsApp university our head is filled with. Okay. So I want to bust each of these myths. One, to say it was a product of a solo act. No, it was not. One, to say that no, we were never consulted. No, that's not the case. So there are problems with both ends. Okay. These are facts. You can't digest them. That's your problem. But the facts can't change. So once I present that, then I'll get into the value-based discussion, where there are at least 4 subcommittees appointed to discuss multiple aspects of fundamental rights, minority rights, and whatnot. Okay. All those discussions I'll go through to tell people, all of this is in the public domain. You want to talk about the constitution, it's a specialist area, but you still want to talk about the specialist area, at least go through the rigmarole of a specialist, which is to read the literature. Okay. So I'm basically going to say, do not talk about a subject without having the necessary ammunition. Okay. Opinions to muft mein aayenge, lekin gyan muft mein nahi aata hai. So you need to work on it. So all of this will happen, and then I will think of the prescriptions. Okay. One of the things that the second book will do is to bust as many myths as possible about the constitution from this side as well as the other side.
Nice, nice. Okay, we're inching towards the end of the talk. Yes. So I have a couple of questions, 2 more questions. Yeah. We've had a long period as the most successful civilization in human history, and no one can dispute that. And of course, we had 1,000 years of the dismantling and the butchery of that civilization. Then we had our independence in 1947, then again a period of neo-colonial rule thereafter, and perhaps some may argue or some may contest a second independence in 2014, for whatever it's worth. Right. What is next, according to you? What would be the next logical step for us as a civilization?
So, Sri R. Jagannathan of Swarajya asked me this question, whether I'm pushing for a second republic. I'm saying, yes, I am pushing for a second republic. And I don't think that second republic has been born yet. Okay. Perhaps the journey towards the second republic started in 2014. Okay. Not even 98 for that matter, because whatever was achieved from 98 to 2004 was completely squandered from 2004 to 2014. Okay. We went several generations back. Okay. So for me, 2014 is when we decided to hit the reset button. Okay. So there also, I would say it's partially reset, okay, in bits and pieces, very few baby steps. But I'm clearly saying that we are inching towards a second republic, and the groundwork must be laid now, because you can't create a republic and then think of what it shall be about. Okay, that preparation must be done now. So I think I'm part of a generation that is laying the groundwork for a second republic. Okay. In the hope that at the very least, when someone finally has the political will, the vision is ready. Okay. It's always better to have a vision ready and then wait for political will, as opposed to having a political will without a vision.
And then looking for a vision.
Okay. You can't go to power and then ask, "Ab kya karenge satta ke saath?" That's not how it works. Okay. Satta mein aane ke baad aap kya karenge, wo aapko pehle hi sochna chahiye. Okay. That's what the period of political wilderness must be used for creation of a vision, in the assumption that when I come to power, these are the things that I'll quickly put in place. Okay. The speed with which you put it in place reflects the preparation that must have gone in before, and the confidence with which you're actively pushing for it, notwithstanding the opposition from the other side. Okay. Right. That means you've thought through the opposition, you've thought through what your responses must be and how to implement it. That preparedness, I don't think, has come about yet. Okay. We are still in an election cycle mode. Okay. And since the state is not exactly undertaking this activity, it is an all the more onerous activity. The only difference is social media, leading publishing houses, and that ramification of the multiplier effect that they create is what is making possible the dissemination of this vision. Okay. In the hope that more people will get on board and contribute to different aspects of this vision. Okay. Because I can only try and address the legal side. What about the academic side, the history departments, knowledge, science, all of these aspects? So others must take care of this. I will do what I can in this. So for me, the next 15 years are going to be extremely critical, because assuming that you spend another 5 years in putting this vision together, you need to again win at the elections to be able to push it. So there's a chance that people might say, yes, without power, what will you do? No, I'm not discounting the utility of power at all. Power makes all of these things possible. I'm simply saying that once power is retained, it is for you to be able to use it in a certain direction. I'm helping you in that in my limited capacity by putting together this basic vision, okay, with all its flaws. Others are welcome to contribute and correct it. But at the very least, a template is sought to be prepared here.
Nice. So I think with that, what's next for you personally? You did speak about a trilogy, the next 2 books. You talk about how you will address the subject of the Constitution. And what would be the third book about?
So the third book would cover the period from the general elections of 1950 to the first general elections of 1952. Initially, I thought it would be at least until 1977, the emergency period, when the Constitution was effectively used as, let's say, a crucible for political ambitions. Okay. But then people said, no, you come right until 2019 because there are such landmark developments. Okay. And it's important for you to cover that. The research team said this, my well-wishers said this. So I said, okay, take it. Because you see, the first book covers a vast canvas of 1492 to 1919. The second book will cover actually only a 31-year period, 1920 to 1951, but that's monumental period. Okay, that's the period where you're looking at this entire tectonic development. Then you're looking at 1952 to 2019, where you had so many developments of civilizational interest and whatnot. Okay, so I have to pick and choose the best possible milestones which change the course of our civilization. Okay, whether it's the Mandal Reservation Committee, or let's say the Shah Banu judgment, or you talk of, let's say, the Places of Worship Act, the Babri Masjid demolition, each of these aspects. Okay, so that will be the third book. So tentatively 1952 to 2019. I just hope I have some semblance of a personal life left after this.
I'm sure it must be very difficult juggling.
Because I'm not an academic, I'm not a scholar. I have my practice. Apart from that, I have to do this. I've already developed the salt and pepper here, so let's see what happens after this.
You've distinguished, you've got distinguished, grace. So a mark of a true scholar and somebody who's knowledgeable. So yes. So thank you so much, Deepak ji. It was so nice to have you, and I've been personally wanting to have this opportunity to talk to you. So yes, this served my purpose very well, and I hope the people watching this will buy your book and read it, because there is so much in there that makes a very strong argument for decolonizing our minds. Even though we may be a little late to the party, but it must be done, or we will never come into our own but remain pale shadows of what we once were. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and I think the depth of your questions brought out even better responses than my previous interactions on the book. So the credit goes to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us. Please subscribe to our channel. If you're drifting browser and you like our content, please subscribe, like, and share widely. We're available on all social media platforms. Until we meet again, namaskar.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Citti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.